Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York, mouth off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
As always, for taking the time out of your day to sit in with me on this episode of The Helping Conversation. My guest today will help me continue a conversation that for some reason, for totally unrelated reasons, I seem to have been in quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, which is about how we as human beings, and maybe even more so specifically us United States human beings, do or do not take good care of ourselves. And this is such a relevant topic every single day. It appears to be a little bit more relevant given what we have all, and we can say this globally, what we have all been dealing with over the last year of some of the impact of the pandemic on our ability to get out and about and move. Versus if you're anything like me, being a bit more sedentary over the last year. And this conversation, again for me, has come up in some different ways over the last couple of weeks. And on one extreme, and this is definitely an extreme, and as our listeners know, I spend quite a bit of time walking in the world of substance use disorder. That on one hand, we've all been reading more about what some people are now calling deaths by despair, which are any combination of either overdoses or death by suicide. And then on maybe the other end of the spectrum are just the number of folks who deal every day with what many call lifestyle-related illnesses. So related to our eating, our wellness habits, our sleeping, our drinking, how well we deal with stress and things like that. And so today we're going to dig into some of that a little bit more about how people can take care of themselves and take advantage of the expertise of my guest. And I was doing a little research before today's episode and looking into some of what I could read about in terms of the impact of chronic pain. We know many people today are walking around with some level of chronic pain, not easily explained all the time, especially within the world of traditional medicine. And one of the passages I read is that chronic pain is physically and psychologically stressful, and its constant discomfort can lead to anger and frustration on the part of the people and the people that they love. By definition, chronic pain is pain that lasts longer than 6 months and affects how a person lives their daily life. And then from the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, because this is the world we're going to be talking about today, is some of their research, systematic reviews and randomized clinical trials that provided encouraging evidence that complementary practices such as Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, massage therapy, acupuncture, etc., help to relieve symptoms of everything from fibromyalgia, headaches, irritable bowel syndrome, back and neck pain, osteoarthritis, and rheumatoid arthritis. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, just the impact of COVID. And this was an interesting piece of research, and this came from about a year ago this time. So when we were first in the throes of dealing with the worldwide pandemic, that nearly 2/3 of Americans confess that the COVID-19 quarantine has derailed their attempts at a healthy lifestyle, and that half at this time last year had already given up on what their usual summer health and wellness related goals would be. And I can only assume that is either the same or maybe even a little bit worse now a year later. And so how do we take care of ourselves? And how do we, for many of us, open our minds and thoughts to interventions that move beyond your traditional physician's office. And I'm not saying this as any kind of knock on traditional Western medicine, but the evidence about the quality and the potentiality of interventions within the complementary and integrative health world is pretty significant, and that's where we're going to be spending our time today. So let me tell you a little bit about our very special guest today, and we're going to dive right in and learn a little bit more about her expertise and her unique brand of the helping conversation. Janis Isaman is the founder of My Body Couture, and she helps people feel better in their bodies. A little bit more specifically, she has a specialty in helping people rid themselves of pain. She is highly certified in both fitness and nutrition modalities and has been quoted as a lifestyle expert in Reader's Digest, prevention, and women's health. Janis provides customized, individualized movement and nutrition coaching. Her certifications include AADP, critical alignment and yoga therapy, Rainbow Kids Yoga, Stott Pilates, TRX suspension training, Yamuna body rolling, and Yin yoga. And I hope I pronounced all of those things correctly. But she's not just a textbook of knowledge with a wall full of certifications. She's a very real person who has lived through her own lifestyle and body challenges. In her one-to-one sessions, Janis provides practical solutions for her clients, taking the time to get to know their lifestyle challenges, and then provides reasonable solutions, buoyed by her lively personality and approachable manner. Her unique discipline agnostic, I love that term, we're going to talk more about that, discipline agnostic approach has helped hundreds of people navigate their body issues through education and movement techniques to full body sustainability. Would you please join me in welcoming into the helping conversation, Janis Isaman. How are you, Janis?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today and making the time to talk with us about this wonderful work that you do in an area where the word that stands out for me for anyone who engages people in a conversation about their health and wellness practices is that you must walk every day in other people's ambivalence. About do they
yes.
or do they not? And I know on the podcast you might not have seen that, but Janis just took a very deep breath and a deep sigh when I said that. So we're gonna dive into that in a little bit because I'm thinking that has to be on your plate every single day. But I always ask my guests to just start at the start. So just a little bit about what your journey has been that has you at this place right now doing this very specific work.
I mean, as many practitioners and business owners will tell you, I created the kind of business I wish had existed for me. So I grew up as a athletically challenged child. It just is not in my DNA to be athletic. So I always found the hardest class in school was phys ed. That was the one that a lot of people look forward to. I was like, oh, can I get a hall pass for this? This is not going well. So I literally was sitting in my high school phys ed teacher's office crying because my academic average was being pulled down by the beast that was phys ed. So that's actually important because when people come to work with me, really, if we go into an average physical fitness setting, the average instructor comes from that lineage where this is their passion, this is their hobby, this is what lights them up. And I actually came in from the other door where I was like, I would do anything to get out of this. I want nothing to do with it. It's very upsetting and distressing to me. And I was overweight as a teenager. So when I graduated from high school, I went to post-secondary education. And there was a bit of a running trend happening at that time. And I decided that I was going to give running a try. And it actually really appealed to me because my phys ed lineage was one of team sports and a lot of ball sports. And neither of those really are suitable for me, even to this day. You throw a ball at me, it's probably going to land somewhere behind me. I'm going to try, but it's probably not going to happen. So I discovered that I loved running. And because I came from that background, my body just couldn't really handle it. So I actually went to university in a town with a lot of hills. And so we did a lot of river valley running. And I ended up with a condition I know a lot about now, but it's called runner's knee. And I mean, years later, the University of Calgary discovered that that is actually a weakness at the hip, but nobody really knew that at that time. So I went on this kind of cycle of let's go to the sports doctor and the physiotherapist and the massage therapist and the acupuncturist. Now, I want to frame this by saying I was a teenager. So typically we talk in our culture and our society and we say, okay, well, teenagers and people in their 20s, their bodies just bounce and they snap and they just do whatever. But as a teenager, I struggled to actually figure out how to get out of pain. And I lived in a house with a whole bunch of roommates. My bedroom was in the basement, and it got to a place where I was hobbling down the stairs, holding onto the rails on the side of the stairs just to get to my room. Not very much the body of a teenager.
Right.
So I started seeking solutions at all these different practitioners, and I would find some pain relief, but nothing solved the issue. And eventually I was referred into a Pilates studio. I was like, I don't even know what this is. It was years before Pilates actually had any mainstream exposure. And most of the people who did Pilates back in those days were actually dancers. So it was actually pretty much a rehab setting for dancers. And I remember walking in, looking at this equipment and these people and thinking, I don't know what this is, but I was desperate. Like it hurt me to sit to study. So I discovered this movement body that actually is one of the modalities that I now work in because it's a system of movement and it made my body feel better. It was the only thing that did. And so that is the base level foundation. But essentially that experience coupled with, again, just that difference of being a teenager where I had extra body weight and I grew up with a mom who was a home economist. So we ate home cooked food and, we had to have all the perfect colors on the plate and a balanced meal. How come my body was overweight and I got all kinds of ear infections? And so I'm framing it like I was some kind of dramatically unhealthy person. But what it really was just this idea that other people have this natural gift. And I have this whole pile of confusion where I'm eating healthy and I'm trying to exercise and none of this is working out. So that was really influential as a teenager. And then I really spent 15 years chasing down my own solutions for how to actually feel good in my body. The irony is now I'm in my 40s and everybody talks about how aging makes your body hurt and feel terrible. I'm like, I feel great. I feel better than I did when I was a teenager. And so through the years, I could tell you various episodes of this same kind of thing. So even with the training and the education, I aged, I had a baby, I had an experience with practicing yoga where my rib chronically popped out. And so every couple of years, I'd find some new thing that would just really challenge everything that I knew. And so for almost 15 years, I chased this particular concept that we're going to talk about today, just as a personal body investigation in that decade of my life or decade and a half of my life, when most people find that seamless, they think nothing of it. And that's pretty much all I thought about.
Right. That's quite a journey. And clearly motivated, as you're saying, by your own need and your own need to find an answer. And so part two for me, in addition to that description of how you got here based on this experience, is I'm a very big believer that those of us who choose to be in a career where we're helping others, that it is not a coincidence that we are in the helping world. And so I always get curious with my guests. If I knew you back like when you were a kid, your your difficulty in gym class to the side, would there have been evidence back then just in how you came at the world, how you thought about things, how you thought about other people, how you conducted yourself in friendships and relationships, that you were destined somewhere in adulthood to be in a position of helping other human beings?
Well, I have two answers for that. Number one, I actually, on my mom's side of my family, I come from a lineage of teachers. So my mom
Mm,
was a teacher, my grandfather was a teacher, and founded a technical school that was ahead of its time. My great aunt was the first dean of nursing at the local university. My grandma went to, what did they call it back then? Oh, if my mom listens to this, she's going to be appalled that I've forgotten. Normal school. So it was teacher's school.
right.
So basically, you can track up my ancestors on my mom's side of the family. They're all teachers.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also grew up in a small town. So I grew up in a town of 600 people.
Wow.
And it was 3 hours from the closest city. I sometimes laugh because I'm like, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. It's 3 hours from one city, 3 hours from another city, 4 hours from another city. So we're in the like triangle of nothing. But what it really meant, and it was pre-internet, pre-cell phone. So there we were with each other,
Right.
and you help the neighbors.
Yeah.
My dad was a farmer. When somebody got sick, if your harvest is done, you go help them. You band together to make lunches for these busy work periods. School fundraisers, everybody chips in. You know, I just grew up in that sense of community.
Right.
Everybody takes food to the funerals. Everybody goes to everybody's baby shower. And so it didn't even occur to me not to kind of take that community outlook. And so when I learned something, you know, sorry to my friends at the time. I'm like so excited. I'm like, guess what I learned today? So interesting. So for me, it feels like a gift to be able to actually share with community.
Yeah.
Because that's how I grew up.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. It sounds like you were literally in the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. So before we dive into how you do what you do, because there's such science behind how you do what you do, can you share a little bit about who you do it with? Who shows up? Who's your, for lack of a better term, typical client?
Yeah. So I actually work with a lot of people who are exactly the kind of person that I described. So somebody who has pain, most of the time it's pain that the medical community cannot find in their body.
Okay.
So in my case, I gave the story of a runner's knee. So I did have a diagnostic, and I do get clients in who have come through that pathway. But a lot of times it's somebody who says, I have sciatic pain. I've had this for 25 years. I've had an x-ray and CAT scan and prolotherapy, and I've had this and I've had that. And I'll get these long stories and medical reports where the practitioner who's assessed this person says, you know, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong. And so I'll get people who have fibromyalgia. That's a common one where there's quote unquote nothing wrong. I will get people who come in. I remember there was a lady who came in with a bone out of place in her foot. Nobody could figure out what had caused that. Yeah, exactly. Your face right now says it all. And, you know, we fixed it up. It was like a miracle for her. I actually really first started down this particular pathway when I saw a young woman in her early 20s. I don't remember actually exactly, but she came to me because she'd had childhood cancer. And the treatment that she had had saved her life, but it was also very aggressive on her bone, just due to the nature of the treatment, due to the age she was at. So she asked if I could help her, and I don't even know what made me say yes. Exuberance, I guess. But she'd had both her hips replaced, and the doctor said she had to have both her shoulders replaced. And she had been diagnosed with something called avicular necrosis, which is death of the blood vessels, essentially. So no blood was getting to her joints, so there was no choice but to surgically change that up.
Right.
So she didn't really want to go down that path, so she came to see me twice a week for 2 years. So this was not like an instant fix by any means, but she later moved and got married, and in the process of leaving my practice, she let me know that she had just seen her doctor. They had given her the all clear. There was no need to move forward with the surgical procedure. And in fact, the last time she'd actually had a steroid injection in her shoulders was the week she came to see me. And that was literally the life-changing moment in my life where I'm like, I had another career that I loved, but that was the moment when I actually knew that I could do miraculous things for other people.
Right.
And not because I'm a particular specially gifted miracle worker, but because that's what I had a passion towards doing.
Right.
I love taking difficult problems that nobody else can solve, where somebody comes to me and says, my body hurts, nobody knows why.
Right.
And giving that person their life back. If we can help them avoid a surgery, we do. If we can help them get more active and moving, we do. Most people just want to have a neutral body where
That's
they're not
it.
waking up every morning. I mean, I've had this. When my rib dislocates, it eats your life. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's not that I sit and think about it all day, but I get half as much done because my brain is just busy with that pain.
Right.
And so for me to be able to give that gift of, here's a tool, here's a technique, you can help yourself to someone else. I mean, I can't think of any other reason I'm here.
Yeah.
You know, there's no other job or work to me that would have so much value.
Yeah. 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 You found how to bring your biggest and best contribution to the world.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm envisioning these folks walking in, and you just said it, in such physical discomfort that it impacts every other aspect of self.
Yeah, it does.
And so because I want to definitely get to this concept about being discipline agnostic, but before we go there, what you do to create relationship, what you do to create trust and safety with people who are walking in, I imagine feeling very vulnerable. Even if you came highly recommended, all right, can this person really help me?
Yeah, there's some skepticism.
Yeah, right.
I also described a client who's often been to a lot of other practitioners, and so I can tell when somebody's like, okay, someone told me to come here.
Right.
You're practitioner number 32.
Right. I have half a foot in your office, but another foot out because, what are you going to do? So I'm always curious about that part for any of us who help, of that in that moment, what we do to immediately start to create relationship, create trust, create safety. How does that work for you?
Well, twofold. One of the things I do put myself in the story. So I am not a practitioner that's running a clinical office where I take a notepad, write things down, kind of say, interesting. The report will be to you tomorrow. If I am actually relating to any part of their story, be that physical, emotional, anything to do with their body, pain, I'm going to share my own experiences. And that usually puts people at ease right away because they know immediately then that they are working with somebody who understands, who's been there. But let's say we find no points of contact or we just feel that wall of skepticism. I actually put the client in their own process. So the first thing that I actually have everybody do is some sort of movement. We're not just doing random diagnostic tests. So I am having someone do a couple of the movements that would make up the two most common things that we do in a day: sitting/standing and walking. And I explain that to them. So it's not just random muscle tests where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a diagnostic setup. I explain why they're doing what they're doing. And then I have them do, let's say it was a Zoom session and I have no equipment available to me. You're going to do a squat. So Keith, I'm going to ask you to do a squat. And as you're squatting, I'm going to have you do it a few times so that my eyes can see the pattern. But as soon as I see something that's a pattern, I start dialoguing with you. I say, it looks to my eyes that we're not actually engaging the glute. Do you feel the glute? And all of a sudden I can actually feel them relax because they get to be part of their own process right away. And I let it be known, and I literally use this sentence: I'm going to say things, you do not have to agree with me. That's another huge piece because actually most of us were trained in kindergarten or grade 1 that whatever the teacher says, we have to just do. So I don't need to be right. And in fact, I would say that the reason I am a good practitioner is because I have listened to my clients, and every chunk of information that's either validation or refuting something helps me learn, because that's how I've trained my eye to see things. So then I'm also getting their language so that I can speak back in their language. So I've got clients that come in that are engineers and they love, anatomy. They love bones. They love all that stuff. I get other people that are coming more from, let's call it the yoga world, even though it's not. They speak in like, my body feels like a cloud. It's like airy, And so what I'm actually doing is then speaking back in their language and just mirroring the kind of language that they're giving me, because it's not going to do me any good to give somebody biomechanical instructions that's speaking in terms of their body being like a cloud. And it's also not going to do me any good to speak in this very ungrounded language to somebody who's an engineer.
Yeah.
In the petroleum industry. That's not a thing. So those are kind of really quick ways to actually connect with people, really put them in the process and let them know that I am the expert. This is what I do for a living. We're not doing anything randomly.
Right.
However, we're also not going to do stuff that doesn't work. We're not going to do stuff that doesn't match their experience. We're not going to do stuff that I'm just saying, well, you need to do this because I said so.
Yeah. I'm struck by, and this would be some of the language I use to describe some of what you do, is that you treat people as their own best resource. And when you talk about you engage them in the process. And when I work with my clients in one of our first conversations, we talk about this concept of accept, reject, or modify. That there might be moments in my work with you where something pops into my head. I'm going to share something, a thought, a perspective, even a suggestion. Please know you hold on to the full power to accept it, reject it, or modify it. And I won't take it personally. It's your journey, your story, and I trust that you know best.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest pieces that I hand back to clients, especially because we're talking about a group of people that have had aches, creaks, pains, annoyances, is a sense of agency. So for me, it's really, 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 I can say that a few more times, really important that feeling good in our body and our health does not belong to a practitioner. It belongs to us. And so when we get caught in that cycle of the only way I can be out of pain is to see a chiropractor, we have no agency anymore. And the second meaning of agency is most of us want to be able to make our own decisions about our own body. So actually, one of the first questions I always ask, whether it's on a phone screen or an email or a client standing in front of me, is what do you want to be able to do? And I've heard so many different answers. I want to be able to garden. I want to be able to do high-level competitive gymnastics.
Right.
I want to be able to stand up from the floor. So some people actually want to be super active. Some people want to run marathons at the end of this. Some people want to be able to go to the gym. Other people just literally want to be able to stand up from the floor or get out of bed and not have pain. And so what we're working towards is being able to have someone have that agency of choice over what they do with their body. There is a huge push in our culture that we have to focus on fitness. And I don't believe that's true. Some people really love fitness. Other people just literally want to be able to go for a walk or walk to the kitchen and cook. And so that agency matters because that's what is motivating that person to want to live in their body.
Right. Yeah, right. I don't know if this will resonate with you, but it just popped into my head when you said that this emphasis in our culture about fitness versus I just want to be able to take a walk. The first thing what popped into my head was you in gym class.
Oh, yeah.
There's this vibe in gym class growing up, as you said, it all focuses on team sports. And if you happen to be naturally skilled at that, gym is a really cool place. But if you're not, there's no
really
other
awful.
Emphasis. Right.
Yeah. And so I think that actually that one becomes really interesting. So per your intro, there is not an adult in North America who has not been hit with a message to go to the gym.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So what we tend to do is just keep banging people over the head with that same message. You've got to go. You've got to get there. And it becomes this guilt and shame and sense of failure. I would actually guess, and I really don't know if there's even anything available that's ever measured this, but I would guess it would be very difficult also to find an adult over the age of 35 who has never been inside a gym. I don't think we could find one.
Right.
We'd have to look. So what is happening is there's a huge disconnect between the messaging, the number of people who've tried it, and the number of people who are actually doing it. So I think it's around 15% of adult Americans have gym memberships. And then of that, there's a very low percentage of people who actually use it. So when push comes to shove, the vast majority of our North American brethren are not going to the gym. And so this is a really difficult thing to kind of unstrand in people. But I really focus on, let's get moving. Let's forget the idea of fitness, because we're failing at fitness.
Yeah.
We're failing at this thing that we're told that we have to love. I mean, like, to your point, in junior high, I thought the world was going to end because I was shitty at basketball.
Yeah,
but guess
right.
what? Here I am. Like, I'm doing okay without it. And if we could all just kind of have that same letting go of the gym, we would actually be better off, because it opens that space to, what are we doing this for? We're doing this so that we can maintain our body, so that we can feel okay in our body. And it's not the art of lifting weights or doing the Stairmaster that's going to get us there. If there's somebody listening to this that loves it, by all means, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
Great. That's your jam. You got it.
Yep.
But they never end up in my office.
Yeah, right. Right.
So we always have that conversation, and there's always a ton of emotion about it, because the shoulds and I will and I can and I'm going to always come up, and it comes with this whole bundle of cultural pressure of what we've been told to, that we don't actually want to do, that isn't working for us for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think we can let it go and just focus on how can we get more movement in our body,
right,
in a body that feels comfortable to live in.
Right.
And if we can get that, we have a good life.
Yeah. 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 You know, I have this presentation that I do. I haven't done it in a while, but a presentation I do just generally on stress in our lives, you know, in the good old US of A. And I have this, you know, slide where you know, we talk about some of the strategies that people use to respond to stress, and one of them is working out and getting to the gym. And then the next slide I put up after that is, how many of you get stressed out finding time to get to the gym? And inevitably, when that slide goes up, everyone in the room starts laughing, and it's the laughter of truth. Right, that we've made this thing that is supposed to be good for us part of what's not good for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's so much wrapped in that statement of what is causing stress. And I will talk very openly to my clients. We have positive stress and we have negative stress. So we don't tend to think of it that way. We think of stress being bad.
Yeah.
So positive stress in our body is going to be a low impact activity. You know, yin yoga is an example, where we're laying on the floor holding a posture. And a high stress positive activity is going to be something like a CrossFit. And so everything that's sold to us by the gym culture is actually high stress positive activity. And for some people that is great.
Right.
But we have to look at the overall stress load of our body. And the frank truth is, having been there myself, if you have chronic pain in your body, and the one that really gets me is my ribs. So I'll go for like a month sometimes, or 6 weeks, where that is just hurting and it impacts everything I do all day.
Right.
My body's actually under stress. And so tossing a bunch more stress on that is going to actually put it into that negative stress category. Right. So if I actually say, okay, the pathway out of this chronic pain is to go and do a CrossFit class, it's not even the activity itself. It's the high intensity of that at a time when my body is trying to give me the signal, hey, we need some attention.
Right.
We need you to rest. We need you to relax. We need to dial down your stress. And then what we're told to do with that is to go and do these, like, focus on calorie burn, focus on lifting heavy weights so that your muscle doesn't disintegrate. And we're not seeing a lot of alternatives being given to us.
Right.
And that's because big gym culture has the market covered on this, and they've done
Yeah.
a great job over the last couple decades. So that's
Right.
great. But then we've got time stress. That's also super real for people. We've got sleep stress and weather stress and nutritional stress and, family and career and financial stress. Look at that whole pie of what that stress looks like. And if we're already working with a really packed time schedule, I mean, the honest truth is a lot of people do not have an hour plus commute time, plus showering, plus whatever else to actually find that. And that actually is one of the things I definitely talk to my clients about. A lot of us will kind of set the goal, like tomorrow I'm going to start hitting the gym, but tomorrow have you carved out that hour and a half that's necessary? Because if you have not, you're going to get to tomorrow night and then feel like a failure.
Right. How do you get more realistic about that? Right. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about ambivalence. So we know that ambivalence is a normal part of the change process for us human beings. I want to, I don't want to, I want to, I don't want to, I want to, I don't want to. And my bias would be, Janis, that I think too often in certain parts of the helping world, we've been trained to focus on the I don't want to part and not shine a light on the I want to part of ambivalence. Yeah. So I'm thinking, again, you're working with clientele who, just based on how we come at our own health and wellness, never mind some of their long histories of being in discomfort, show up with a great deal of ambivalence. And how do you respond to that?
Well, I am lucky enough that I get to do some show and tell with people. So what tends to happen is, I described a little portion of the beginning chunk of the work we do together. So we're going to do some testing to see where we're at. We're going to have that conversation. We're going to build some rapport. So as soon as we kind of identify that there's a pattern that we need to modify, we're going to do an exercise to actually help free the body. So we talked about stress a little bit, but there are other reasons this could be the case. But almost all pain in the body is caused by either inflammation or compression. They have the same function where we've got something that's trying to take up the space. So we lose the space in the body. So we could be talking about rheumatoid arthritis. That's an inflammation. It's going to give us pain. We're going to get those aches and creaks and pains in the body and our joints because the joints are compressed. And so that sounds like so simple, but that's how simple it actually is.
Right.
It's really, we've got bones, muscles, and joints that just don't have enough space to move. So I use one of 3 techniques at this moment in time to help people get the tissues decompressed and the joints decompressed. So yin yoga, which is long hold yoga, works your fascial system. It's on the floor. So you find a posture and you're in it for 3 to 5 minutes. Yamana body rolling, which is a system of balls that we lay on. It actually has no correlation to foam rolling, but that's kind of, if you have never, ever heard of that technique, think more of that. But the core difference is it's on a ball that can sink all the way down to the bone.
Ooh.
So it's very deep.
Yeah.
Then there's a technique called critical alignment therapy, and it uses cushions and a strap. And the theory and technique behind that work is that our bony structure is meant for gravity to pass all the way up the spine and all the way down the spine. And when we actually have gravity that's displaced, it goes off into the muscles and causes pain, tightness, and discomfort there. So depending on what is presenting in the client, I will give them one of those techniques. And then we will start to peel the body open. So let's get some space into the body. Let's get gravity running back where it should be, and let's see what happens. And so honestly, within the first 7 minutes that somebody is in my space, we have a change in their body. And so what I'm able to actually do is do that change exercise where we're decompressing the body. Then we go back and we do the first exercise. So if we started with a squat, we're going to do that squat again. And then all of a sudden, the eyes of my clients will change. Oh. And they can feel what that space feels like in their body. And actually, I'm not going to lie, when we can actually feel that in our body, we don't need to be told. We
Right.
don't need to be told to do our homework.
Right.
We do not need to be given a lecture about how good this is for us. We don't need anything else. I would say that 90% of my clients do the homework that is assigned to
Yeah.
them, which
Right.
is an incredibly high percentage
Right.
for an exercise discipline, because usually we get I have a ton of people that come to me, they're like, the physio gave me some exercises. I never did them.
Right.
But because these are actually exercises that I've shown the client, immediately 5 minutes is all you need. You don't
Right.
need an hour. If this is the only thing you have time for tomorrow, do this. They will do it.
But I also wonder if part of the reason you have 90% of your clients doing their homework, so to speak, goes back to how you even start the conversation. So back to treating them as their own best resource, talking about agency, making them a part of the process. So there's nothing going on here that isn't about their own sense of urgency, inner motivation, whatever it may be.
No, I completely agree. And at the end of it, I mean, we always start with an educated guess on my behalf. I have a lot of education, a lot of experience. I've had a lot of people through there, but it's still a guess.
Yeah.
And I let them know that. And that actually diffuses it too, because I think there is a lot of nervousness coming into this, that like, okay, I'm paying to be here. This is my 30-second practitioner.
Right.
What if this doesn't work? And at the end of it, if they feel nothing when we come back into that squat, we're not proceeding down that road. I've got other tools that I can take. I mean, that's why I listed 3 different disciplines and techniques right there.
Right.
Because some people are going to respond better to one. Some people are going to respond better to the others. So we mix, we match, we kind of sort that stuff out. And like I said, if I have a client who's like, I literally felt nothing, I'm like, okay,
all right,
we're going to switch gears here and go in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So talk to me about this concept of discipline agnostic.
Oh yeah, this one's my favorite. So I teach privates because I want to be able to give somebody the tool that is actually best for their body. And so again, when we're talking about fitness, this one isn't that common in that world, because we go into fitness classes, and I'm just going to use the most simple example that exists because we all have been there. But we go into a fitness class and they are teaching one movement to all bodies, no matter what's happening, no matter how old the people are that are attending, no matter which gender, who's pregnant, who's postpartum, who's injured, who's got long-term health, chronic conditions. It's one movement, one set of cues, one set of corrections. This is what we do. And they tend to be really based on a specific discipline. So for example, Pilates, we can go to a Pilates specific class. We can go to a yoga specific class. Well, in my experience and in my own body, and this is where this concept first originated, I mentioned already that I have a challenging body. This thing is like, it is like stubborn like a mule. It is not having any of some business. And so I noticed, even my first love was Pilates. I noticed even within that body of work, there were just some exercises that actually bordered on injurious to my body. And so then I went seeking other tools, other techniques. But within any given body of work, every single one of us is going to bump into some exercise or some movement or some shape that just is not, it's not only not doing anything for our body, but in some cases it's actually harmful for our bones. You know, the bones inside of our body are as different from the appearance of our face. So it's not all the same inside. So actually, when clients come to me and they say, I want to do Pilates, most of the time I actually refer them out.
Right.
Because what I'm trying to give to somebody is the solution, not the technique.
Got it.
And whatever technique is required to help that person, I am agnostic about it. I did mention my first love was Pilates, but at the moment when I'm giving any exercise, I love them all equally. They're all my children, because they are providing a solution to a body in pain. And so that's one component. The second thing is, I think that we've really institutionalized human movement. And this really started in the 1960s with bodybuilding gyms. So prior to the 1960s, there was no such thing as a gym. it took about 20 years for gyms to move into mainstream. And there's kind of, whole stories on Wikipedia of how this all happened. But, in 1970, it would have been weird to look out the window and see somebody running. You would have been
Right.
like, what's going on? Should I call the police? It would have been really unusual to see somebody lifting weights, etc. So a lot of the things that we think of as just like standard things we do are really quite modern. And so people have really looked to, what should I do? And there's two reasons for that. Number one is because we all went through a traditional elementary school education process where sit down, do what you're told, listen to the teacher, wait for instructions, and you will be told what to do.
Right.
But number two, as far as, I don't have a single client that I can think of off the top of my head who is older than gym culture. So everybody's been exposed to that. And with that comes, here's the body shape we should be moving in. This is what a squat looks like. This is what a lunge looks like. And so most adults have lost the idea of what it feels like to just move their body in something that's not a specifically designated body shape headed towards a specific destination. I have a 10-year-old son. Let me assure you, out on the playground, he's not counting reps. He's not counting steps. He does not have his Fitbit on. He's not saying, hold on, I'll come home as soon as I've done another 9 ladder climbs.
Right.
And he's not concerned about the specificity of the shape his body is making.
Yeah.
So what we've kind of done is we have a body called yoga, and we do certain movements. And we've got a body called Pilates, and we do certain movements. And that's how most adults sort of categorize it. And so when I talk about being discipline agnostic, I also am talking about just getting rid of all that and saying, let's just move our bodies. So we don't need to worry about what the shape looks like. This is actually one of my biggest pieces that I have to unstrip for clients. Always in the first 3 sessions, a huge chunk of the time is, am I doing this right? Is this right?
I was just going to say that that has to be a piece of it. We've all been taught there's a right way to do everything, and there's a right way to do these. I'm sitting here thinking of a few years ago, I made my first attempt ever at doing yoga. And I struggled with it for that reason, because I can be a little bit competitive. I've always been pretty athletic, and I was all caught up in, am I doing this right?
Yeah, and that is exactly what happens.
Right.
And so what I have done instead is put the focus back onto, where do you feel it?
Yeah.
And that drives people out of their minds. So if we're in a shape, the shape is an approximation. And so, yes, you're paying me to watch you, and yes, you're paying me to tell you what to do. But what is missing for most people is, what does it feel like? Where do you feel it?
Right.
And then we start to learn about the bones. We start to learn about the muscles. We start to learn about the differences and the nuances of those sensations. So a lot of my work is actually that underlying education that's more about what it feels like and how we use terminology and what languaging we put to it. So remember I talked about how we dialogue?
Right.
That's a huge piece of it. So every exercise that is done, client lays on their back and I say, what do you feel right now? What are the differences between the side of your body you just did, the side of your body you didn't do? We have to put those words out of our mouth. There's a huge awareness for most people that is just absent. They have no language skills for it. They're not sure. And often, especially when we're talking about decompressing the body.
Yeah.
In fairness, I'm asking them to describe the feeling of space. What does space feel like?
Right.
And I've gotten all kinds of things over the years, but that's actually what we're really doing. We're going underneath and getting that awareness of, what does your body feel like? And when you do these movements, where do you feel it? Because you could actually be in the most perfect looking yoga posture and feel it either nowhere or completely in the wrong spot in your body.
Yeah, it's not working for you.
And what good does that do you? So I actually get people that are injured from CrossFit and yoga, and not to pick on those disciplines.
No, I hear you.
they get competitive in those environments and
Yeah.
they hurt themselves. And I might be putting my own hand up here, dislocate their rib in hot yoga and then spend 5 or 6 years getting back. So I know what I'm speaking of because I did this too. And then that changed that element of my approach. It was like, okay, we need to actually, no one told me in those yoga classes where I should be feeling it. So I was looking in the mirror, I was copying the teacher, I was doing what I was told, A+++ student, but I landed myself in with a chronic condition in my rib. And that is a hard thing to actually get rid of once you got that. So when we really talk about the techniques that I'm doing, it's really about getting awareness, subtlety. So I'll give you an example. A lot of us will talk about going to yoga for quote unquote flexibility. And I ask a client what that means. And usually that's the answer.
Right.
So we go through 4 to 5 movements. So I have somebody lay on their back and put their knees on the ground. We're going to come into spinal rotation. Well, that's a kind of flexibility.
Right.
Then we're going to do something. If you've ever done yoga, there's a position called pigeon. So you're feeling a stretch in the bum. And I'll cue them, find the top of your bone in your leg, find your pelvis, and then feel the muscles stretching. That's traction. So that's a kind of flexibility. Then I'm going to have somebody lay on their stomach, put their hands down, and come into what's called a cobra.
Right.
So they're going to feel a compression in their back. Well, that's a kind of flexibility because we can't just stretch things out without any hydraulic measurement to pull it back in.
Right.
And so it's that kind of thing where people often just are doing something without that subtlety of, so if I'm in pain and I need to actually get some flexibility in my body, how do I even know which of these movements to do if I actually have no awareness of the difference? I can't put words to the difference. And I've never actually had anybody point this out to me before.
Right. You're really, it strikes me, Janis, that you're essentially teaching people a new language. So, so to go on what you've shared, that we've all grown up, quotes around that, with the language around fitness, the language around movement, like this is what a squat is. And then we've made that worse with our own internal dialogue of I have to do this movement right.
Yeah. I want an A+.
I want an A+ on how I do my squat or my lunge. And your ass, I would imagine people look at you like you have two heads when you ask them to start describing body sensation versus am I doing the movement right?
Yes. Most people settle into this so quickly because it's so freeing.
Yeah.
And the results that they get from this, because it is so freeing, are so fast, it's going to seem like I'm lying.
Right.
So, for example, I had a 44-year-old woman start with me about a month ago. She booked a session of 3, and the underlying pain was sciatica. She'd had it since she was in high school. So we're talking about, 25 plus years. She had been to every practitioner under the moon. And so she did do the homework in between. So she did follow what she was supposed to be doing. But in the first 5 minutes of the third session, I asked her how her body felt. I asked her how her pain was. It was gone. 25 years in 2 sessions. And so I think that because we're not fighting, we're not resisting.
Right.
We're actually being aware. We're moving into feelings in our body that actually feel open.
Yeah.
We are moving into shapes that actually feel like places our body want to be. Most of us have bodies that are like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. Right.
I'm home. And so, I don't say that every single client gets that intensity of result that fast, but I actually do hold to this. 98% of my clients feel a significant reduction in pain in 3 sessions or less.
That's
to the
awesome.
point where they will have something quite similar where they're like, I can't even believe it.
Right.
It's gone.
That's awesome.
But you're absolutely right. It is a new language for the body.
Yeah. All right, so I'm looking at the clock. This hour has flown, as it always
has.
does. With most of my guests, I always feel like, all right, this has to be part one because we have to, continue this conversation at some time. So let me ask you a couple of last things as we start to wrap this up. For me, one of the foundational strengths of a really good helping conversation is to be strength-based with the people you work with, which you've described wonderfully so far. But I always get really curious with my guests about your own strengths. So what would you say in your work are some of the strengths, positive attributes, positive characteristics that you bring to your practice?
I'm extremely compassionate. So one of the things, and we didn't even touch on this one, but 100% of my clients who come in with pain have emotional pain somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
And it starts to come out as soon as these release techniques are introduced to their body. So it's miscarriages and broken marriages and financial stress and childhood traumas and sexual assaults.
Yeah, the body does not forget, right?
And so whether it's somebody's body or somebody's emotional journey, I have a huge amount of compassion. So I know where to push. I mean, there's times that like we're exercising, it hurts. Sorry. But there's other times when I can see somebody is in actual, and one of the terms I talk about all the time is we don't want to get to the place where we're injurious, and that's either emotional or physical.
Right.
We don't go there.
Right.
And so, just that experience of introducing compassion and self-compassion, especially when it comes to our bodies, we tend to have these internal dialogues that are just so toxic and negative. And so for some people, I'm the first person who's ever given that sense of encouragement and compassion.
Right.
I think I really am curious about people. I'm curious about their life. I'm curious about their body. And it's genuine. It's not some sort of like, ooh, this is going to my business model. The small town girl in me definitely comes out where I just feel like I want to connect with my clients and I want to be real with them. And not all of that reality is pretty. I mean, I have clients who've been with me through some pretty high stress moments in my own life, and I don't hide those. Right. So it's part of it for my clients. So I think that those are things that my clients would all tell you, that they feel like friends, whether we actually socialize outside of the studio or not.
I hear you. I feel the same about the people I work with. Yeah. And
it's a huge gift for me and for my clients.
Yes. Yeah. It goes both ways. If somebody is listening and is thinking about moving in this kind of direction professionally and of doing this kind of work with folks, words of wisdom for that person if they're just starting out.
It's not, people ask me this all the time. What training do you have? So it's not about the training. It's about the desire to find solutions.
Right.
So that sounds almost like the same thing, but it really isn't. So I have a ton of education, but a lot of the different techniques that I have, I could have swapped that out for a different training, a different body of education that was also amazing.
Right.
Really, for me, the driver was, I've got to get a tool that's going to help my clients. I've got to get a tool that's going to get this done faster for people. I've got to get a tool that's going to actually really like condense ladder 15 years of my own struggles into 5 minutes of helping someone.
Right.
And so then I would go find that training, but it's not like I could hand somebody a list and be like, here, because it's what you do with it. It's how you combine it. It's that underlying curiosity and drive. And so actually, I think in a lot of ways, this is definitely the kind of work that you build your own practice and you build it based on your own interests. I have a psychotherapeutic technique I'm adding in because of that emotional piece.
Right.
And so it really is, it's a work. My advice is really follow your own curiosity and shape the kind of business that you wish had existed when you were struggling.
Yeah. Awesome.
Because you will always have a full roster of clients if you do that.
Yeah. Look, I not that this is necessarily the be all and end all, but I do think this is a requirement of building a very successful business in the field that we are in, and you talked about it, and that is that people perceive you as genuine and real, right, and authentic. Because I think that for so many people is missing in almost every other area of their life, of feeling that in a connection to others, never mind somebody I'm coming to in a really vulnerable moment.
I completely agree. And I am clear about this. I'm not everybody's practitioner.
Right.
I'm not. I mean, I have expectations that somebody's going to actually stand up and do their own work. I have expectations that someone wants to have that agency. Like I did one time have a client who basically wanted it to be a spa. And I was like, listen, I don't think that's and I also think that there are people that want that division where they want the clinical practitioner who fills the entire hour with clinical speak and things like that. And for me, that conversation is actually a huge piece of the healing. It's that relationship, it's that emotional unveiling, it's all of that is actually very much a purposeful part of my work. So if there is somebody who wants that greater distance, that more quote unquote typically professional physiotherapist or what have you that shares nothing of their life, I'm not your person.
Yeah, right. Janis Isaman, thank you so much. This was it was just such an eye-opening, and I'm sitting here with a sense of joy, a joyous conversation awesome. in listening to the work that you do and what you bring to the folks that you work with. I really appreciate you making the time to sit in with us today.
I am so happy that I was able to appear as a guest. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And we will stay in touch because this is one of those, there's going to be a part 2 somewhere down the road.
Yay!
And keep
awesome.
This conversation going. It is, it's just fascinating. And again, no knock to traditional Western medicine, but this is so needed as an alternative. For people to pursue.
That's the thing. I think that those other pathways and those other tools exist already, and they are great, and they are what they are.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we're disparaging them by offering something different.
Right. Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. You be well.
You too.
All right, everybody. Thank you for sitting in with us. I have a quote here from Janis that I'll just throw out as we bring this to a close. Feeling good in our body belongs to us, not a practitioner. I love that. I wrote that down with big quotes around it of our sense of agency in getting our body to a better place with the guidance and compassion and expertise of somebody like Janis. As always, on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast, please check out the podcast episode notes, all of Janis's contact information, her website, Facebook, Instagram. She's out and proud in the social media world. All of her contact information will be in the episode notes. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with her. So again, I thank you for making the time to be with us, and I invite you to join us for the next episode, as we continue to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the helping conversation. Everybody, have a great day.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.